Welcome to the Content Strategy Interviews podcast. Each week, we talk with accomplished content strategy experts to share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. And now here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 9th episode of the Content Strategy Interviews podcast. I'm delighted today to bring to the show Susan Walker. She's a web developer at Rutgers University, the Camden campus in New Jersey. And I saw her speak at WordCamp US a few weeks ago. She talked about this methodology that we're going to talk about today called 30 questions. So I'm going to ask Susan to introduce herself and talk just about what you do there at Rutgers. And then I'd like to get right to the 30 questions.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Susan Walker. I am the web developer at OIT Camden, Rutgers University. I do pretty much everything related to WordPress. The campus has been using WordPress for about 10 years now. They brought me on in 2011. I was intended to strictly be a support person, but what's evolved from the whole thing is a growing ecosystem. So we now have upwards of 250 sites. I think it may be close to 270 now. And pretty much everything except for worrying about the server side of things.
Right, that's a lot. I didn't realize it was that. I knew it was a big campus. Is that like individual faculty and departments and all kinds of different people have their sites?
Yes, we have actually sort of a managed hosting approach to it. We have one multi-site installation that is strictly departmental and official websites. We have another one for personal websites for any full-time employees. Right now, we're not doing anything with students on a regular basis. I imagine we'll be looking at that in the future. But right now, things are growing so much that we're just trying to keep up with the essentials. And then we have a lot of specialized websites. The Encyclopedia of Greater Philadelphia is one of the sites that we host.
Oh, wow, that sounds interesting. So now how big is your staff? You've got me curious now about, are you doing all this yourself? I hope not.
Most of it, yes. Anything that has to do with theme selection, plugin selection, development, maintenance scripts, just keeping tabs on things. What we've done is because mainly we're dealing with academic schools as opposed to, say, the registrar's office at this point. I think that'll be changing in the next couple of years. But they have a point person who hypothetically is their content specialist. Whether they actually have skills in that area is, really depends on their particular situation at any given time. I am the person who sits in the room and tries to deal with the big picture issues and the troubleshooting that nobody else can deal with, and I let these people, I call them ninjas. We don't call them administrators because WordPress uses that word in so many ways, it's just confusing.
I like that.
So I deal with the ninjas. The ninjas then deal with the people who need to be trained and supported. And then we have a sysadmin who is not dedicated full-time to the WordPress installations. He is actually committed to the data center.
Wow. So there's a lot going on there. And among other things, all of these various ninjas you're working with and all these departments and individual faculty, you're helping them, or you're kind of working at a level to make sure that the overall, the sites work on their own. And the example you talked about, though, at WordCamp US, you talked about I think it was the kind of the home destination for the campus, which I know is a little different thing. But you talked about how there was at the time, the example you showed in that talk, you talked about it was a really attractive site. People there was a consensus it was like the prettiest site they'd ever had, but it totally wasn't working for people. And so you applied your 30 questions methodology to figure out how to make it work better. And I think that's, it's like, what's the point of creating all this content if people can't get to it and actually use it, and if it answers their questions or helps them accomplish the task they showed up for? So can you tell me about kind of where the 30 or first describe the 30 questions methodology, and then tell us where it came from.
Okay. It's actually fairly simple once you've got the questions together. The idea is that to get to the questions themselves, you kind of do an overview of your organization from the user standpoint, what it is that they're actually looking for, what support they need, what questions they want answered. For universities, that's a fairly standard set of things. So once you've got this in hand, then you have people who are actually going to try these out. And starting from the home page, you use any tools that are available, whether it's a search feature of the site, menus, anything that you happen to see on the page, and find your way to that information. And as you go through this, what you're doing is recording how long it took you to find it, assuming that you found it at all, which is not always the case, and how long before you gave up possibly, what pathway or what steps you took to get there. And then once you arrived, was the information complete? Was it, as far as you can tell, accurate? Was it up to date? Was it relevant to the question? And was it easy to understand?
So in your talk at WordCamp, you talked about kind of the results of that, but I was curious about the actual methodology. Like, do you just sit the users down with like a form to fill out, or how did you administer like they attempt to answer each of these questions, and how do they document that, or do you have like tools to track them and stuff?
I kept it very simple. I just used an Excel spreadsheet. And I had fields for, what the question was, how long it took, what the path was, and a field for any notes, anything I found along the way that was worth making note of.
Right. And so how many different people would test this? Would you do a lot of it yourself and then recruit some other folks as well, or?
For the exercise that I talked about at WordCamp, I want to say it was about a half dozen people. I think 3 or 4 of them got all the way through. Some just kind of dropped out and brought the notes that they had. And then I had maybe that many more people who were volunteers who were Facebook friends of mine. And instead of putting them through the entire exercise, I said, does anybody want to volunteer? And if they contacted me, I gave them 5 questions and gave them instructions. But we don't sit people down in a room. It's not a formal study in any way. It's very much a diagnostic tool.
Gotcha.
So if one person has trouble with it, it may need to be looked at. But if 2 or more people are having trouble, then it may very well need some attention, and we can take it from there. And really, we did all come back, and as we started reading off the things that we really noted, we all realized that we were pretty much in complete agreement. So the details as to time and path and so on may be slightly different, but the overall conclusions were the same.
Gotcha. And then once you had the conclusions and the data in front of you, I'm just curious, how much of the findings were the things you remedied? How much of it was like information, like kind of navigational kind of things, and how much of it was actually improving the content itself to better address the user's needs?
I would say that the vast amount of problems that we hit that time around were navigational issues. And a large amount of the challenge with the main website is that it then has to jump out for at least half the content to the admission site or something like that, which is up at the central campus in New Brunswick. And so we can try and clean up the pathway up to a certain point, but then beyond that, we have to hand the problems off to somebody else and hope that they see value in cleaning it up.
Right. Well, I guess that's a generic challenge. You're kind of in the middle. You're going upstream to the parent campus, plus you have these hundreds of faculty and departments that you're managing, and plus this central website for the campus. Yeah. How many like how big a site are we talking? And when I say site, I mean I wonder what we're even talking about. Is there sort of would people consider the central site that you're talking about and all those satellite sites part of would, from like a usability perspective, would people consider that like a destination that they're just trying to find their way around in?
Yeah, sometimes you can look at it, well, either way, really. Sometimes it's just the pathway through. I think from the user standpoint, they would prefer to see it as all one thing and not feel like they're getting kicked around from place to place. Practically speaking, for a university as large as ours, because Rutgers is now a Big Ten university, they were doing a preliminary study for accessibility purposes, and I think they determined that there are actually several million web pages out there for the university as a whole. So there's simply no way to have a nice continuous pathway in all possible directions from all possible entrance points.
Right. A lot of times in huge sites like that, the taxonomy schemes are used to kind of stitch stuff together, disparate things like that. Do you have pretty elaborate and well-developed taxonomies to aid in that, in kind of building the navigation schemes?
No, not really. I'm pretty sure if you use the word taxonomy for a lot of our different groups who have websites, they would be staring at you blankly right now. The only areas where there is some sort of direction and planning is in the areas involved in marketing directly, which come through New Brunswick and would impact the main Camden website to some extent. That's a branch of that. But there is no web governance and no communication pathways right now. There's a listserv that is mainly for web developers and sysadmins to know of technical issues that they're running into, but content-wise, there's just no strategy, and that's actually one of the things that I'm working on right now at the Camden level, is trying to bring about an awareness at the administrative level that this is something that we need to deal with.
Right.
And it would be good business practice.
Exactly. You know, one thing, there's this emerging notion, I just used the word emerging, but some people talk about emergent content strategy, like especially when you have like a lot of user-generated content or kind of rogue agents like you have on a college campus, that your job as a content strategist is to infer and discern the strategy because these are academics, they're smart people, they have something to say and things like that. So have you found, to what extent do you think that project of maybe getting a content strategy there will be kind of articulating some best practices about it, or how much of it do you think will be discovering how people are organizing and strategizing about their content and sort of accounting for that? Do you have a feel for that?
Yeah, I think it is going to be a certain amount of both. One of the main points that I've been making, because I prepared a separate presentation that I've taken to my supervisor, and there's another IT group on campus. We're kind of working our way around, but if you take the Venn diagram of who makes the decisions about budget and personnel and content, and you take the people, which is a very small group, who might actually know what the ramifications of these decisions are, it is two circles in completely different area codes right now. So my immediate goal is to get those two circles to overlap a little bit so that we can begin discussing. I feel as though individual sites, the School of Arts and Sciences, for instance, have some idea of what it is that they're attempting to accomplish and what users are trying to do and so forth, or at least that information is there. I don't know that they're mining it efficiently. But if we have 4 or 5 different schools and central administration and admissions in the registrar, and they are all having their own vision of marketing, and they're implementing it differently, and they usually know about as much about marketing as they do about the web, that it is not working really well together, and maybe we need to be looking at it so that we're delivering messages that are consistent and also cost effective.
Well, that's it. So that's, and I think this is a challenge a lot of people in your position kind of face, is that like you're watching this and you're going, oh my gosh, I not only have to educate them about web practices and usability and accessibility and all these things, but they don't know about marketing either. So do you, and you mentioned kind of pulling those 2 Venn diagram circles, so there's at least a little overlap. So do you feel like you have the skills set? Do you feel like you're gonna, what do you think your chances are of, and do you think you could be like, I guess what I'm picturing there is that you see this, and it seems like you could be the sort of a mentor and a guide in helping them, because it's all about addressing their users' needs and their customers, whether they're students or prospective students or fellow faculty or whatever. Do they? How's that going? I guess, or are you seeing those circles coming any closer together?
We're in a really interesting position right now for. I won't go into the history of the campus, but we actually have 2 IT groups on campus, which is a little bit unusual. And we have WordPress installations. The other group has Drupal installations. And then the central Camden campus usually hires a bunch of third parties to do whatever it is they're going to do. Somebody high up in the administration realized that this didn't really look good from a business practices, and they are currently studying the situation. Probably in the next year, there are going to be recommendations to consolidate all that, and based on the level of experience I have, because I've been doing university sites since 2003 now, that I would probably be a key player in all that. I've got mixed feelings about it because it is a chance to, hopefully enact some change and get some things done. On the other hand, I'm very much a web developer and a doer, and I hate to be pulled away from my code to be doing meetings and paperwork. So.
Right. But that's an interesting, have you been in that position? You've been doing this, almost 15 years now. That it sounds like you're going to be in a position pretty soon where you'll have to be making recommendations about which CMS, because sounds like there's 3 choices now: the third-party stuff, the Drupal or WordPress. How do you approach that, or how will you approach that? There's a lot to be considered there. But how do you, as sort of a manager of a bunch of different units, how do you just decide which is the best recommendation you can make about which CMS to use?
I would say in our particular case, it's going to be which one we've put the most work in, as well as which one's going to solve the most problems the quickest and most efficiently. I think I can make a pretty strong case for WordPress. I expect that I'll have to do that at some point. I do expect it to be a little bit challenging, because if we do come under one umbrella, besides the central site being in Drupal, the rival IT group, I hate to call them rival, but I don't know what else to call them.
Right.
They have 3 or 4 people who are Drupal oriented. So I think that they're going to be a little bit reluctant to give up what it is that they're comfortable with. But there are a lot of the older Drupal sites, as I've gone through and looked at things in the past 6 months or so, that they would benefit just from shifting over to WordPress with a fresh look, because we are running a newer theme than they've got out there. And there's an awful lot that we're doing in the way of making SEO and analytics support available that has kind of slipped by the Drupal developers, because they're more focused on building elaborate forms for the registrar's office and so forth. So I think that it would be a multi-year process, but there's a lot of things that we could shift around. And whatever we end up doing, you don't want to force something into a system that's not going to work. So if Drupal does turn out to be the best solution for something, I don't want to break it just to, strong arm them into that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think we might be of similar minds there. I kind of wear two hats. I'm pretty active in the WordPress community. I'm on the community team and do like event organizing and things like that. But when it comes to content strategy, I feel like I have to be CMS agnostic, that any one situation, you don't know what's going to work. So it sounds like, and then you have the additional layer of existing, and this is almost always the case in an enterprise of any kind, that there's going to be legacy things to cope with as well. It's good. Hey, I want to go back. I just remember there was a couple other things I wanted to ask you about the 30 questions methodology.
Sure.
That I wanted to circle back to, because like you talked a little bit about how you rounded the people up, but we didn't talk too much about the findings. It was interesting to me, like how there was a pretty wide range of some pages where people just got to right away, but a lot of them, there were challenges getting to them. Were there any lessons learned in there about either content creation, information architecture, kind of navigation kind of issues, that any take-home lessons that from that testing about the best ways to do that, the best ways to organize kind of a big, a messy amalgam of sites like you do?
I'm not sure that there was a single rule, because I like to compare websites to fingerprints. There are no two in the world that are exactly alike, and the problems of one are not going to be the problems of the other. I feel as though generally they were so focused on appearance that they were not thinking about functionality, and that they need to work on form following function a little bit more.
Yeah.
And with that, I prefer to, when possible, start out with the bare content and then work out from there and build around it. And of course, at universities, that's not always possible because of the scale of what you're dealing with.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think a lot of people are going to that approach of, give me the content first. Let's look at the content first and then build the user experience around that. But once you have sort of some content model, then you want to test it. And that's why I was so taken with your talk, is that you had such a kind of a simple, affordable methodology for testing a bunch of users really quickly. So do you have, like, does the design talent that you were working with, are you the designer as well? Are you like a real old-fashioned webmaster doing everything? Or did you have some UX talent, like some people to help evaluate the research or do front-end, like UI design and stuff like that for you?
No, we don't. I am very much of the old school, doing everything myself. The way the design process works here, and it's built into the philosophy of certainly OIT Camden and the WordPress sites, is that we're not out to build a lot of unique appearances and so on. We take whatever is handed to us by the main Camden website, and in the current instance, there's been a redesign since I did the 30 questions exercise. That was handed down to them by marketing at the central campus. So it filtered down a couple of steps. I took a look at the design, and it's close enough that if you don't realize that they're separate platforms, you wouldn't know that they're actually entirely different things. But I worked a little bit more on details such as color contrast, to make sure that that was a little bit better in the WordPress version for accessibility and so forth.
Gotcha. So actually, let me back up to the very beginning, like a little bit more about your background. How did you, because you have developed an impressive array of skills. You're almost like what Jared Spool would call one of these new unicorns who can do like front end, back end, design, content. What was your pathway into this world? world?
I never intended to go into IT. I actually, back in high school, I had a 4-year scholarship to electrical engineering, which I turned down because I am a very introverted person, and that's about the most introverted profession you could possibly go into. And I didn't want to wrap myself up in this tight little shell and never come out of it for the rest of my life. I ended up going into mass comm instead and becoming a journalist. I did that full time at one newspaper for a dozen years, and from there went into a couple of years of public information at the local college. And while I was there, that was when the internet was just becoming a thing. And one of the things I was told was that the college catalog was going to have to go online, and I was going to have to facilitate that somehow. So I contacted the OIT group, and depending on who I talked to in OIT, they gave me a totally different answer. And I suspected I was getting the runaround, but I didn't know enough to be able to call them on it. So I took a class in HTML. This was like 3.0 at the time. It was ancient HTML. Realized that I was actually pretty good at it, and I enjoyed it a whole lot more than I did tangling with the ins and outs of doing public information. So I made my transition that way.
Cool. So it's like there's that story of like the original kind of tech origins, or a little bit with the EE interest, and but I love the personal growth angle there. Like, no, I'm not going to just retreat into this solitary profession. I'm going to get out there and do some mass communication and then journalism, and then here you go. I think I've done, this is the 9th interview, and I've talked to almost everybody about their background. Almost everybody has a similar kind of thing, some kind of tech thing way back in there, but mostly journalism or publishing, and then here comes the internet, and whoa, hang on, here we go. So actually, we're getting close to the half-hour mark. I want to, anything last, Susan, while you have the ear of my audience, are there any other insights, especially about content creation or content strategy, or kind of content usability, that you'd like to share with my folks before we wrap up?
Well, there is one thing that I mentioned that seems to have been a big hit at WordCamp, and it was what I call Walker's Principle, that dysfunction in your organization will manifest itself as dysfunction on your website. And there's all sorts of different ways that can possibly happen. It's one of those things that if you can possibly address it at the core instead of patching up the website, then you're ending up several steps ahead of the game.
I love that. I mean, we've all seen that, and now you've named it. Thank you. We have the rainbow. Well, thank you so much, Susan. That last little thing you said, I can think of many other things I'd like to talk with you about. So I'd like to hold out the option of, well, at least we'll chat at the next WordCamp we see each other at. And I'll, but maybe try to get you back on the show as you discover new stuff. I'd love to hear how, this sounds like a multi-year thing, this sort of integration of all the IT stuff at Rutgers. But anyhow, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up now. Thanks so much for taking some time out to this and to talk with me and my folks, and have a great holiday season, and look forward to talking again soon.
Thank you for having me. Have a great holiday.
You bet.
Thank you for listening. Tune in next week for another content strategy interview.